Questions. I guess that is something that I'm always asking. As you know, I was asking questions even on the way here this morning. And what's going to come out this morning, I'm not quite sure. So we shall see. But it is quite exciting, really. I do have a very interesting life, as I'm sure many of you do as well. One of the things that I'm involved in, of course, is here at St Martin's Centre, and it's so lovely being back as chair of the partnership, only for a while, because we'll be looking for somebody else to take over that very soon. But we do have a day, or half a day on Wednesday. Kevin and Trevor and Joan too is going to be there. We're going to the Jury Inn, so I'm not sure, I don't know if people know the Jury Inn down in Newcastle, but we should have a very interesting time. So that's on Wednesday. As you probably know also, I'm very involved in the cathedral. I was talking to Carol just now about a project there which is called the Lantern Initiative. I don't know if you remember, some of you who were here when I was here last time will remember two lads who came in and sat with us. I think people thought that I knew they were coming. I didn't, they just turned up. And it was so lovely to see them. They were actually involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the things Carol was telling me that they said to her was that they needed to come to church, and they came. And I think they quite enjoyed it, to be honest. I was wondering just whether they'd been back, but clearly they haven't. But I think they're involved in this project in the cathedral, because the Lantern Initiative is a project which is all about vulnerable people, not just people who are struggling with addiction and that sort of thing, but also people who've been on the streets the night before, people who are asylum seekers. And it is really very exciting, so that's one of the things I'm involved in as well. Again, as I think I might have said this before, the Cafe 16 at the cathedral is actually run by prison leavers from HMP Northumberland. And so this is giving people a second chance. So that's a very exciting thing that we're actually doing. If you haven't been to the cathedral yet, I mean, it is totally and utterly transformed. And that's what I've been involved in over the last 9 years, I guess, since leaving here in Byker. It is really worth going to have a look. So that's the cathedral. Something else I'm involved in, I don't know if you remember a guy called John Squires. He used to run Benfield Motors. And Benfield Motors had a foundation called the Benfield Foundation. And actually this building here is some of the generosity of the Benfield Foundation is actually in the bricks and mortar of this building. John Squires is an amazing guy, I don't know if you remember, but they sold Benfield Motors to lookers. And so they did have a few pennies in their pockets, but he is very generous, and together he talks to me quite a lot. We've got to know each other very well, and we're putting together this project called the Church and Community Project in Tynedale, which is an area going from Allendale up to Bellingham, a big area. And the idea is to try and help the voluntary sector, the community groups, to actually be working much more closely together with the churches. Because one of the particular things the voluntary groups struggle with is the fact that they don't have space to deliver their services. So that's another thing that I'm involved in, and we're just about to appoint somebody to sort of run that project, which is very exciting. And then one other thing I'm involved in is, you've probably heard of the Tynedale Hospice at Home. Rather than it being a hospice like St Oswald's Hospice, where you go in and you live there, as it were, Tynedale Hospice at Home, the idea is, it's based in Hexham, and the idea is that you actually have people coming in to look after you, so you can stay at home, stay in your own home, which is a lovely idea, although generally speaking, when the final days come, people do have to go into some sort of residential hospice. But it's really interesting, and I've been giving people lifts. I'm a volunteer driver, and I take people for treatment at the RVI or the Freeman or Cramlington, or even as far as North Tyneside Hospital on Rake Lane. It's all over the place. But you meet some amazing people, and I just wanted to mention somebody that I met this past week. a lovely guy. He was 89, so getting on a bit. Certainly older than I am. You probably think I'm near that, but I'm not yet. But he was quite amazing, and he has leukemia. And here's this 89-year-old who has to go into the hospital for 5 days, 5 injections every 4 weeks. So every 4th week, he has to have lifts into the Freeman. That's where I went, to the Freeman, to actually have this injection. And then then the following day, and the following day, and the following day. But anyway, you can imagine with people like this, you can have the most amazing conversations. This guy was actually somebody who used to work for Barings Bank in London and has moved up here because his daughter's up here. And anyway, he said to me, so what did you do, John? And of course, so I say, well, I was a priest. So he really got asking questions. He wasn't a churchgoer, but he says, he started asking questions, for example, and you can imagine this with somebody with leukemia, does prayer work? What about prayer? How, if I ask for healing, does it work? Does God hear you? So we had a really interesting, I'm not going to go into that now, we could have a really good discussion about it, but we had a very good discussion in the car, I can assure you, about prayer, not only about prayer and how that works, about death, what happens after we die. And so again, of course, being 89 and with leukemia, can't be far off really. And so it was something that was concerning him. So we talked about death, and then we got talking about the church. So what's the church? What does it do? What is it? And I have to say that his experience about going to church, I think he would say that he had a faith of sorts. But he wasn't, I have to confess, he was, very honest. He said, well, I'm not sure what to make of the church, because he couldn't really see how sometimes the experience he'd had of church, of going to church, seemed to sort of say very much about the present day, about what's going on around us, and how we, as a Christian community, sort of need to sort of connect in that sort of a way. So we had a really good thing, and that, of course, is why I was thinking about church coming here this morning. This notion that one of the main things for us is it's about reassurance, so that actually we are reassured again together, we talk together, and it's a community about how much God loves each one of us, but not just ourselves, because the other thing is about being a challenge, and this whole thing, and I know I've said this to Linda and I think they'll probably think, oh, here we go, and Trevor and Sandra, but there's a big difference between going to church on a Sunday morning, which you do, oh yeah, been to church, that's it, tick that for the week, and being the church. And being the church, of course, is something much deeper, because it's a 24/7. It's something you do all the time. It's living our faith. It's sort of, so it was a really interesting conversation, and I was talking about the same thing with this guy in the car, and it was, we were talking about, because I think he felt that if our Christian faith had anything, it was much more about living it, not just on a Sunday and going to church, but living it, and it's a 24/7 thing. And that we constantly need to be challenged about what God is calling us to do and to be in our lives. So that was really quite an exciting sort of thing. And so we got talking about that. And as I say, the conclusion that we came to was that being a Christian, being a believer, being a follower, being a disciple is much more about how we live. Church is important, or ought to be important, and I have to say that I've not been to many churches where it hasn't really helped me one little bit in terms of reassurance and challenge. But that's what it's about. I mean, those two words are quite good. Reassurance for us, and challenge to go out and be Christ in the world. So it is important to being church, to going to church, but going to church is only a small part of being the church. So that was a sort of a bit there, which was quite interesting. So with that in mind, and of course, as I've said the past few weeks that I've come, what is it that the readings are saying to us today with that in mind? Because we've had these 3 readings beautifully read, and what I say is, well, what is God saying to us through those? Well, Jeremiah, well, thank you for reading that, but it's a bit sort of, it's very divisive, it's very partisan, it's saying, you're either in or out. Now, I don't know what you think about, I think that's trying to get us to think about questions. I don't know where you are with this. I'm certainly not a sort of either in or out sort of person. I am so convinced that God's love is so immense, so unconditional, that nobody is out, that we're all in, and that in the end there's not a sense in which God judges us, that we judge ourselves, and if we want to be out, we decide ourselves we want to be out because it's too real, too hard. So I'm not really sure what to say about the Old Testament lesson, but thank you very much for reading it. The New Testament lesson, the one from Corinthians, again, I'm not sure whether you understand that. It's very tortuous. For if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised. If Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. That's okay. It's all about Jesus' resurrection, and that, through the fact that he rose again, we have that reassurance about love and life. So that again, but it's not, it's okay, but it's not easy. But then we come to the Gospel, which is, of course, the Luke version of the Sermon on the Mount. Now, you'll probably be more familiar with the Sermon on the Mount in St. Matthew's Gospel, but the Luke version is slightly different. But it does talk about, not just about coming to church, but how we live. Which is, I think, rather good. So he says, "Blessed are you who are poor." Now, there's always lots of questions around that. What do we mean by poor? Poor? Have we got to go out and give all our money away? Well, I don't think. It's how we use what we've got, isn't it? It's what we have in terms of our life. Is not just about possessions. As we know, we probably know people ourselves who grab lots of things to them because it's all about what you've got, not just in terms of articles, but in terms of money and all sorts of things. The trouble is, the more you have, I love this idea, the more you have, the more you have to protect, the more you've got to spend time actually looking after it. You're much better off with less, because then you haven't got to sort of, pay the insurance or whatever. So there's that thing about possessions that I think then it's, "Blessed are you who are hungry now." Yes, I know some people, it's all about food, isn't it? But it isn't, of course, for some people, though, who haven't got any food, it is about the next meal. So there's an interesting thing there, but I think it's us having a real concern about people who are hungry and somehow or other living our lives in a way that makes a difference for them. "Blessed are those who weep now." That doesn't mean to say you have to go out and cry, but it does mean that we have to have a concern about the vulnerable, about the sorts of people who came here, those 2 lads who were struggling with addiction, having a real concern about them, or having a concern about the homeless, having a concern about whoever, the vulnerable people, and sort of being alongside them. So that's it. And then it says, "Blessed are you when people hate you, exclude you, revile you, defame you." That's hard, isn't it? That we're just going to be put on the edge, put on the outside. But actually, I have a suspicion, as with Jesus, if we really do try and live 24/7 our Christian lives, if we try and stick up and stand out for the vulnerable, if we try and say things that are at least honest and true in this time when so much seems to be lies. We won't talk about the government at the minute, but there is a lot of very sad stuff, and the really horrible stuff is that people believe it because they don't ask sensible questions. But if you're the sort of person who really does stick out for the truth, stick out for justice, stand up for somebody who is struggling, then you know it is the fact that people can begin to hate you. The trouble is that after you wonder then if you're right or not. That's the difficult thing, as to whether you are right or not if people exclude you and revile you. Am I doing the right thing? But you have to believe sort of to go forward. And that's all about how we live our lives. So it's a sort of lifelong journey. Don't get the idea that I'm perfect. As you know, I'm not. And we all of us have a journey. We all of us try and live our lives as faithfully as we possibly can. But it is asking those questions about, you know, because even, for example, if you're going around the town and somebody is there with a cup wanting money, okay, what do you do? What I do, I'm not going to ask you to answer that, but what I do quite often is, keep my head down and go past. And it's just so sad, because there are those people who are very vulnerable, very lonely, very on their own. And what I'm trying to do now is I don't actually give them money, I stop and have a conversation with them. And even that, now that's quite hard to do, but it's a very good example of what living our Christian life is all about. It's about being the church out there in the middle of Newcastle. So that is pretty much really what I want to say, but I just want to say one other thing, which is something that Desmond Tutu said, and I love this, and I hope you'll remember it. Now, what did he say? What Desmond Tutu, and as you know, he died very recently, such an amazing, amazing man, said such beautiful things, so different from many of the bishops in Africa. He said, "We are only the light bulbs." So this is what we're called to be, is the light bulbs, not just on a Sunday morning, every day, 12 hours, you can sleep, it's all right, I'll let you think. 12 hours a day, you've got to be a light bulb. And then he says, and our job is just to remain screwed in. Now that's important, you see, because that comes back to the reassurance thing. We are the light bulbs, and that's being out in the world. I mean, actually, just thinking about this hymn we just sang, send forth your Spirit, Lord, renew the face of the earth. We sing that, we sang it beautifully. I've not sang that hymn before, thank you. But send forth your Spirit, Lord, renew the face of the earth. It isn't God who does that on his own. We're actually saying, you know, come to us. We're here. Put your Spirit in us. Send forth us into the face of the earth, out onto the streets of Newcastle and things. And that helps us to be the light bulbs, but we've got to remain screwed in. That's what church is about.